Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my thoughts on Bill and Ted comic books. Let's start with Bill and Ted's Excellent Comic Book Archive by Boom Studios. Um, this collects, for the most part, the entirety of the Marvel Comics run of Bill and Ted's Excellent Comic Book by Evan Dorkin and others. It just doesn't include, I believe, issue 8 because that was not one that Dorkin actually worked on, so they decided not to include it. And I could see why. It has a completely different art style, and it also is nowhere near as well written. And it feels like in a lot of ways, that issue feels like it's just a filler issue more than the other issues that we're actually trying to connect to some sort of story arc for the most part. This one just feels like it's just there, and there are some others in this run that kind of feel like they're there as well. But that one in particular really sticks out like a sore thumb. But you can find it online or you can buy the issue separately if you really feel like you want to have the complete run. I can see why they made the decision not to include it. They include the cover art, but they don't actually have the issue. I'm trying to find it. Yeah, it's issue 8 of Bill and Ted's Excellent Comic Book. Now, this also includes the adaptation of Bogus Journey, which is a lot of fun because it includes the third act, the way it was originally written, as well as other deleted scenes, like the one where Bill and Ted are working on breaking rocks in hell, or the original moment where Bill and Ted actually, the zipper face gag where Bill and Ted unzip their faces, the evil robot Bill and Ted's, and reveal that they're hiding inside one another. And like I said earlier, the deleted third act where Bill and Ted are in a car chase with their worst fears from their personal hells. So yeah, it's a lot of fun seeing the third act in that particular fashion. I will say this though, it is a mess in terms of its writing, so I can see why it was rewritten. I honestly feel the way that it was done in the film itself was much more satisfying, but that's just me personally. When it comes to the run itself, it's fun. I didn't love every issue. Some issues were a little bit too convoluted plot wise. The stuff that deals with like time and all these other things. I think they're called like Time Lords or something. Which no, actually that's a Doctor Who. They're called something else. There's a time thumb. It's a thumb that has wheels and has like a squid inside of its head. There's some stuff in this series that's a little bit too out there for me, and that's one of them. But there were some fun issues. I liked how they connected a lot of the characters to Bogus Journey and Excellent Adventure. This is actually a straight up continuation of Bogus Adventure. Bill and Ted are even dressed in the same ways that they were in Bogus. Um, I like issue 2 where Def decides to take a vacation, and Bill and Ted have to try to get him to take his job back because now that Death has taken a vacation and he's not doing his job, Death is just taking a break, literally, and not just the personification of death, but when people die, they aren't dying. So you have a bunch of like rotting corpses and zombies walking around. So that's an interesting concept, and it's just a lot of fun to see Death going around using the phone booth to visit the Hindenburg or the eruption of Mount Vesuvius or Pompeii, and just chill out, take photos, and so on and so forth. It's a really clever concept. But this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about, like the time thumb and just some really just weird stuff. They add a new member to Wild Stallions. His name is Philip because Death becomes their manager. So they add Philip to the band. He's alright. I wish they did a little bit more with him. They do a cool thing in one of the issues where Bill and Ted use Station to build this Bill and Ted land for their kids, for their two little sons. And they have this thing called a time roller coaster, which they end up using at some point later in the series to good effect. Bill and Ted also they play the Reaper again at Monopoly in issue 5. They even go to Mars and visit and return Station to his planet. This is a little bit of a letdown this issue though, because they go to Mars and they do nothing with it. They just are at Mars for a little bit and then they're gone. But the whole thing of Bill and Ted playing Monopoly and beating Death again, that was pretty funny. As you can see, Death is portrayed differently in the comics than he is in the movie. He doesn't look like William Sadler in white makeup and black eye circles. He looks like the normal personification of Death, where he's a living skeleton. And it works in comic book form. But this is what I'm talking about. The chronological order, this is what time is, and it's just, I don't know, I'm just kind of not super big on that. Denomalos comes back with reinforcements, and Bill and Ted have to stop him. And his band of villains from Canceling the Future. The art style takes a little bit getting used to, but once you get used to it, it's not that bad. I actually wound up liking it. It definitely does bring back some MTV Liquid Television kind of vibes in terms of how rough around the edges it can be. One of my favorite issues though is issue number 9, where Death gets fired from his job and he gets replaced by Morty. And Morty is this guy who is a total douchebag. So he's this asshole who now has the job of being Death, and he handles it in such a snarky way that it's honestly pretty funny. Also, just the image of Death working at Pretzels and Cheese is also pretty funny. And in this issue as well, actually no, it's in a later issue, where I think it's issue 11. Yeah, issue 11, where they Bill and Ted find out that Lincoln's going to get assassinated, so they try to stop him from being assassinated and create a new alternate timeline, which is really bogus. But one of my favorite parts and one of my favorite things about this series is these few pages where Bill and Ted and Death are going to Planet of the Apes marathon. I thought that was really fun. Issue 10, I'm not a fan of at all. This one really sucked. This is an issue where they were doing a comic book parody. Something that Evan Dorkin himself even said he didn't want to do. He really did not want to do it. So then they did a comic book parody for issue 10, where Bill and Ted are superheroes, and it just doesn't work, and the satire isn't very clever, and yeah, I just wasn't a fan of that issue at all. And then you have the final issue, which Evan Dorkin and crew, they had enough time to realize that, okay, this is going to be the last issue. So they really went all out and did a really nice send-off to the comic book series. Tied up all the loose ends, and had a fun bit of business where there are all these different phone booths that come down from alternate universes, because I think it's like Bill and Ted's anniversary or birthday or something, and you see all these different versions of Bill and Ted that appear. You know, a female Bill and Ted, Jill and Zed, uh, even Hellion Bill and Ted. So yeah, that's a pretty fun concept, and then you have this great panel to end the series where everyone's going, "Party on, dudes! Be excellent to each other." So yeah, it's a fun series. Some issues are definitely better than others, but if you're a fan of Bill and Ted, I'd recommend it. I recommend giving it a shot someday. It's a nice continuation to Bogus Journey and Excellent Adventure. Captures the same manic spirit as the films do. Overall, it's a fun read. Now, the next comic book collection for Bill and Ted, the Bill and Ted Omnibus, which is also by Boom Studios. This is excellent. This is most triumphant, and it really honestly astonished me and really surprised me in so many different ways. I actually thought I would like the excellent comic book archive more, but this one ultimately impressed me the most. I think in large part it has to do with the writing. The writing for the comic book series that are included in this graphic novel and this collection are top notch. Easily the best Bill and Ted stuff that I have read or seen since the first two films. I have no idea why Keanu and Alex did not reach out to Brian Lynch or Brian Jones or Joins and ask them to help them write Face the Music, because these two guys get Bill and Ted. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I really enjoyed reading these comics from the Bill and Ted Omnibus so much, is that they really do get these characters, they get this franchise, they find ways to make things like Missy marrying Denomalos actually work. They by making Denomalos a more three-dimensional character with a little bit more depth and actually making him likable, which is no small feat. They also get Deacon involved in a much grander scale, and also Ted's dad. They even introduce new characters. It seemed like throughout these comic book arcs, throughout the storylines of these particular comics, the scales got bigger, you know, and the spectacle became even greater, but it still was grounded when it comes to the characters, when it comes to its overall approach to this franchise, despite taking Bill and Ted to space, or taking Bill and Ted back to hell and having to deal with Napoleon, who has decided to take over hell and become the Emperor of Hell as well as Earth. And then things like Denomalos has found a way to really take over the future by taking advantage of Bill and Ted's kindness. So there's a lot of things about these comics that worked really well, and one of the biggest things was definitely the writing. To me, Bill and Ted Save the Universe, which is the last one featured in this omnibus, is the perfect send-off to Bill and Ted. If you're going to do another Bill and Ted story, it's the perfect way to send off the characters, because it even introduces some new characters into the fold in a really compelling and genuinely enthralling fashion. Now, this omnibus includes 3 different arcs. So you have Bill and Ted's Most Triumphant Return, and that one deals with Denomalos taking advantage, like I said, taking advantage of Bill and Ted's kindness, because Bill and Ted decide to go to the future to when De Nomolos was a teenager and teach him how to play guitar and try to befriend him to prevent things from happening later on in his life, to prevent him from hating them so much, because they just genuinely do not like the fact that De Nomolos doesn't like them. So they go back in time and try to do the right thing and help De Nomolos and teach him how to play guitar. But in the process, they screw themselves and their future, because De Nomolos takes advantage in such a really insidious fashion, where now that he knows how to play guitar, he steals the song "God Gave Rock and Roll to You" that was played at the end of Bogus Journey, and plays it with his own band, De Nomolos, and takes the future that Bill and Ted were supposed to have as wild stallions away from them. So that prevents Bill and Ted from ever having two kids, prevents them from ever having this success. And De Nomolos is the one, and his band is the one that the future is built around. And so in Most Triumphant Return, Bill and Ted wind up spending more time in a post-apocalyptic future that is controlled and ran by De Nomolos, which is something that I really wanted to see more of anyways, Bill and Ted in the future, because I didn't feel they were in the future really long enough. And there's some really cool, fun stuff too, like Bill and Ted build their own Gundam inspired mechs, which is really awesome. And Station and Death get involved in the storyline, as well as Rufus, in a really satisfying way. I like how Station in this future, Station is, there's only one station because the stations got separated, so this station is kind of depressed and, you know, really going through the motions, and isn't able to really fix the time booth until Bill and Ted come into this future, and the station, it gets really happy and actually gets some inspiration to fix the phone booth, so Bill and Ted can come to this future with these robots, and then play a much more lighthearted, happy song to get people in the future to change their minds about Bill and Ted, as well as rock and roll music. And they fix the future and actually do find a way to change things in terms of their relationship with De Nomolos, which ties into the later issues in later arcs. I would say Most Triumphant Return is my least favorite out of the comic book story arcs that are included in this omnibus, but it was still a fun read. Then you have Wild Stallions B-Sides, which is essentially a Bill and Ted anthology comic series, which has a bunch of different Bill and Ted short comics that feature different characters. There's one that features Missy for the majority of it, because she's the focus of it. Different art styles. Like this one is kind of similar to Rick and Morty in some ways, a little bit. You have ones that I really didn't care for, like for instance the art style here. This is like if Bill and Ted was a Cal Arts cartoon. I that's just ugly looking to me. But then there's others that were honestly really cool. I would say my favorite of the B-sides is the storyline where the princesses get involved and help Bill and Ted, where what happens is these two futuristic chicks from the future who know how to play guitar really well, they come into the past and try to impress Bill and Ted and try to get them to have them in the band instead of the princesses, but it's all a ploy so that they can just take over and make this excellent future that Bill and Ted are destined to have their own. And the princesses at this point in time are kind of struggling with knowing what their place is, and then they realize that they're there to help Bill and Ted by protecting them and helping them out in their vulnerable moments from straight up hacks and villains like these two chicks, and they get this pretty epic moment where they get to kick their asses, which is really cool. The second comic book arc is Bill and Ted Go to Hell, and this is another fun one. This one, you get to see the return of the Nightmares, the evil Easter Bunny, Colonel Oates, and Bill's grandma. And the reason why they have made a return is because Satan has been captured and hell has been taken over, like I said, by Napoleon. And this is a water park. He created a water slide in hell because he loves water slides so much. And I actually liked the setup of having Napoleon be a new villain for Bill and Ted to try to fight in this particular arc, because it makes sense. Napoleon has always seemed like the historical figure in Excellent Adventure that really didn't buy into Bill and Ted. Like, he was there along for the ride, but he really liked the water slides or the ice cream more than anything. Like, he wasn't really into Bill and Ted, and you could see how Napoleon would get super irritated over the years. Bill and Ted kept coming to the past to brag about their accomplishments. So you could see why Napoleon would be really perturbed by that, and especially knowing that his fate is to die and to lose the Battle of Waterloo, and he's such an egotistical person in history and in real life. So it makes sense that Napoleon would be like, no, I'm not going to die, I'm going to be immortal. So then he takes over hell, and then he beats death at another game and finds a way to go into heaven, and then he takes over heaven. So now Napoleon is the emperor of hell, heaven, and earth, which is a pretty daunting task for Bill and Ted to try to stop. But they get some help from the historical figures and Rufus and even Satan himself and Denomalos and of course Death, and they find a way to make things right. They even meet their future sons, who are now like post-apocalyptic assassins who are tasked to kill their fathers. There's a lot of big spectacle in this particular storyline, and it's genuinely a lot of fun, and I thought it worked. The art style definitely takes some getting used to. It's not necessarily my cup of tea, but I'm willing to give it a pass because the writing is so good. They really get these characters, and it's just so much fun to see their interpretation of these characters. I will say Bill and Ted Save the Universe, though, is my favorite, not only when it comes to the art style, but in terms of the storylines. This is where you get new characters in the form of, there is a alien badass chick named Sheena. The whole concept and the whole not necessarily novelty, but the whole premise of seeing Bill and Ted in space is really cool. And the new characters are Bill and Ted's moms, who have a really epic grand storyline in connection to Rufus and the fate of Bill and Ted and the universe and the world. And now there's this whole thing where Bill and Ted are trying to, I guess, determine whether or not they want to sacrifice some time on Earth to bring the universe together with their music. And so that actually creates a rift between Bill and Ted, and it's a believable rift. It adds some extra depth to the characters. And then there's a lot of fun stuff too, where Bill and Ted go through an obstacle course, an alien obstacle course, and they wind up getting involved with this villain, which winds up corrupting their brother Deacon. So then Deacon winds up becoming a main adversary in the overall story. And everything culminates in a very fun and epic, grand, bodacious, just really excellent fashion. Bill and Ted even find a way to make their futures work. You know, not necessarily futures, but make the whole spreading their music across the universe work without sacrificing time with their families by working with other inventors and stuff like that. Like, I think Station gets involved, and so does some others, to fix and to amplify some kind of apparatus so that they can essentially teleport themselves across the universe to all these different universal venues and play music in front of all these different aliens and so on and so forth, but then teleport themselves back to Earth so they can go on a universal tour. And that was really cool. And then they use time travel in a really satisfying way, and overall it's just a really impressive, well written, well done, epic, enjoyable comic book series. I cannot recommend the Bill and Ted Omnibus enough. I thought the Bill and Ted Omnibus was really, really impressive, really well done. I would actually recommend getting this before the Excellent Comic Book Archive. If you like this, then I would recommend going back and checking that out. There actually are some connections to the Marvel Comics in some of these comic book stories that are featured in the omnibus. You have some of the characters that were in one of the comic book story arcs actually makes an appearance, I think, in Bill and Ted Go to Hell, and there's a few other connections here and there. But really a blast, and I went through this in an hour, and it was really a quite enjoyable, fun experience. And it helped wipe the bad taste in my mouth from Face the Music, although it's honestly kind of still there. But here's my thing with that: I'm just gonna straight up, flat out look at that as some non-canon story, and I'm going to instead replace that with these 3 comic book story arcs, because they feel much more in line with the first 2 films, and they ultimately provide a much more satisfying series of sequels to those films. Anyway, thank you for watching my thoughts on the Bill and Ted comic books. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.